Hello, everyone. Oops. Oh, sheesh. That was a loud notification. It's Thursday, February 16th, 2023. This is a SIG Architecture Enhancement Subproject meeting. We are under the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, so be good to each other. If you have any problems, please feel free to reach me off of the call and we can talk about it. So I'm Kirsten. I'm an enhancement subproject owner, and we have basically one topic on the agenda for today. And I was actually looking at it last night. I only just saw it. So I think actually seems like two. I'm going to say that Sergey's topic is two.
It's related, but no, not exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's kind of different. So can we do Sergey's topic first? And I think we'll just make it a separate one.
Sure. Yeah.
I'll take some notes, I guess.
Yeah. So the question, or in the past I came to the meeting and asked about updating the template to remove the mention of dynamic kubelet config. And before that, there were another removal, or addition, perhaps, during the 127 release. I also asked for adding the question about node resources, and this question was added in the middle of the release process, so many people got affected by that, which is not ideal. Positive side is we get very good replies on this question, so it helped a little bit. I think it made Kubernetes template better. So, but I mean, process-wise, it definitely wasn't okay. It was in the middle of process, and we didn't update existing caps. People just didn't know what to look for. They didn't know there is a new question, and when release managers would look at the template, they will find it and they will raise the alert, and it will be another catch-up PR. So not ideal from process perspective. Right. So for removal of dynamic kubelet config feature, it's just removal of just very small. If you look at the PR I posted there is a small commit actually removing the question, but then I also followed up with update to all the bulk update of all other caps, all existing caps. And a challenge for me was I didn't want to update all the caps because some of them are already implemented, so it's kind of archived. Right. So I went through all of them, and I think it was 70 something or something. So I carefully looked at them and tried to surgically remove it only for caps that are not implemented yet.
Right.
Yeah, and it's not ideal process either. So if we'll do some versioning as Mark proposed, or in any way, whatever we do, we either need to make it a responsibility of cap owner to catch up with new questions, or we need to make a process of updating, bulk updating of caps, a little bit more easier. I don't know what tooling we can come up with, but at least show warnings or something that it wouldn't build. Yeah. So that's the question.
So, So there's I think that the thread from what I can tell between your topic and Mark's topic is there's part of a communication issue, right? Because on one hand, the template maybe should be updated, but the real question is how often should the template be updated? How critical is the update, and how can we do that in an effective way? Yours is more straightforward, I think, because in your own way, you're well, I can remove this no longer needed portion of the template, and I can also unilaterally bulk update these caps, which doesn't really, I don't know, it doesn't seem to cause that much problem the PR that you have. Whereas Mark's is that something was added to the template, which shouldn't have been added to a template, and people were getting confused about it. So I'm kind of, I kind of think first of all, there's the primary thing is, how is this communicated? I see that there's a pull request in the enhancements repo, but I do kind of think that those types of PRs should go into the Slack channel so that people know about it. But I also kind of have concerns about piecemeal updates to the KEP template, because I think like, so Mark has this other issue, and I guess we're kind of discussing them at the same time because these are two distinct issues, but then they kind of come to the same topic, where the question is, how do we best make updates to the KEP template, right? Like that's the whole question. And I think in the past, like there were lots of little piecemeal updates, and then we kind of held off making, you know, like updates to the template for about a year. And that's why I think that the pull request that Mark referenced really took me off guard a little bit, because I actually had no idea that that merged. Because if I would have seen it, I wouldn't have let it merged as well. So I'm sorry, I drank a lot of coffee. So I'm trying to get my thoughts together. So yes, right. Like I think that versioning the KEP template is something that like we've talked about for a long time. And I think that the actual adding a version to a template is like a very small piece of the actual solution, right? Because adding a version doesn't really do much. Like if people aren't aware of the changes, and we also don't want to be just updating versions of a KEP template like every release. I mean, that's a lot of churn for PR authors, I think, to always be updating a template. And so I think that the real question is, which was something that I wanted to actually go to the PRR meeting next week and find out, you know, how can we better manage like some of these changes that are coming into the KEP template, and like thinking about in a larger scale, not just PRR changes, but like what's a good cadence for those changes, and then how can we, you know, not block changes, like have those changes as sort of work in progress, but also carefully roll them out to KEP authors. So that's like really scary.
I'll also add to like a little bit of the hat that I'm wearing when I filed this issue is that I'm the enhancements lead for the 127 release. And a big, like, I think that if we could somehow add the version to the KEP template, but then also check, like have a PR check to make sure that if people are updating the KEP templates, they're on the right version, that could save a lot of the manual process that some of the enhancements team has to do. And also just provide an earlier signal to the KEP owners, because then as soon as they, you know, open a PR, something could check and say, hey, you're not using the latest version of the KEP template. And they don't have to wait for somebody from the enhancements team to go and look at the, like start tracking their enhancement issue and then look at the PR and then comment and say, oh, this part's missing. I think it's just a quicker feedback loop for everybody.
Well, I think, and I was on the release team for a really long time, so I'm wearing like I'm not wearing the release hat, but I think that the version, I don't think that it's probably going to end up in the markdown file, because I think that that's going to be like harder to parse like programmatically. I think that we could put it in the YAML if the sole purpose is to say like, hey, you didn't update your template, right? But I think that even if somebody does update the template, there's still that question for the enhancements people to say like, hey, like, did you actually fill it out? Did you actually like put a substantive answer into these, you know, fields? But I think that what happened, from what I can tell, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, PR went in to make a change to the KEP template while people were doing their enhancements. It created, you know, another question that they had to answer that they hadn't been, you know, aware of. I actually wasn't aware of it at all. It wasn't communicated in any like real way. Like there wasn't an announcement or anything. It happened in the middle of a release as opposed to before a release. And it basically took people by surprise. They had to go back and update their KEP, and it was just an all-around drag. There was some confusion for the enhancements team as well, because they didn't really know, and they're getting a lot of mixed signals, right? Like I think that was something.
And it was a little bit like the question was only required for the PRR reviews for enhancements targeting beta too, so it wasn't sure like for the enhancements team, it's like, oh, if it's targeting alpha, should we make sure that they put the question in the template so that but don't need to fill it out, just so they don't forget it when they do progress to beta and things like that. But yeah, it kind of came in the middle of the early part of the release, and yeah, it was not communicated to, at least I did not know about the communication until we saw it, or somebody saw somebody commenting it on the PR review.
So I think that was probably like a mistake, and I don't think that the intention was to confuse people. But I think that the fact that the mistake happened was a problem, right? Because like in your issue, you referenced the test plan section update. But when that happened, I think that was like a year ago. That happened before the release, and an email was sent out to KDev and to the SIG leads, and it was told to the release team. So everybody was more or less on the same page. Like, does that mean that everybody follows directions? No, but that means that, like, you know, people were let know ahead of time. So I think that, you know, a version wouldn't have helped us in this case, you know, because there's like I think versioning the KEF is definitely important, but that wouldn't have helped us in this case, right? Because you still might have had a version come out of a new KEF and in the middle of a release cycle, which is kind of a problem. So
that's that's part. Yeah, that is a I think we need to make sure that the KEF templates don't get updated at least
so
in between the release start and enhancements freeze.
Yep.
But I do kind of feel that it would be helpful to have a PR check somehow to make sure that the authors are, you know, targeting the right version template, because I do see cases too where like sometimes the PRs that are updating the markdown files stay open for several releases because they're trying to progress a feature to a certain state, and all the discussions are happening in the pull request, and then it slips from one release to the next. So being able to have that reminder of like when they push updates, rerun the PR checks and make sure it's on the latest version of the KEF template, I think could still be beneficial. Right.
No, I actually agree with that. I think like from previous discussions, because I actually proposed something similar to this like in the past. So it's not the first time. So I think that like there's a couple problems here. Like there's like the question of how do changes, like this is like almost like an incomplete solution, like in a way, like just putting a version on the KEF, because the question is really how do we update the KEF template? And there's like these competing interests, right? Because it's like, well, the template will need to get updated at points in time, right? And there are people, maybe the PRR team, maybe other people who have these ideas that they think are a good idea to implement, and we don't want them to just have PRs like outstanding forever because it's not the right time. But then there's the stability of the authors who are pulling from this template all the time, and they're under time crunches, and you know, they also need to kind of be aware of what's expected of them. So part of it is, you know, it might be branching, it might be, I think before I proposed just like having a draft KEF template where we put all of the changes in, and then that kind of gets squashed into like the version, which would allow people to like work on the KEF. It would allow people to in some way like diff the KEF versions, because that's like a big deal. Like to have versions, you have to be able to see what the difference is. And if you're kind of constantly merging into main instead of another branch or just like a separate directory, you really lose the ability to easily say these are all of the changes. So that's like kind of what the versioning, like it's a little bit harder than just like slapping a version on the template and calling it a day. And I kind of just want to talk to like the PR people and everyone else to kind of get some points of feedback in what to do. But like, I definitely agree with you. Like the versioning is really important, but it's like, how do we get that version? And then how do we like enforce the idea of like KEF templates cannot be updated all of the time? And the problem with that is like the ownership of like different directories and everything else in GitHub. But also not having like a clear process and not wanting to block some updates. So let's make it to do actually, because like I think that these are like, this is really important. And so like we want to version the KEP template, but like we don't want to block change, like proposed changes to the template. I'm just writing some notes like in the shared doc.
So I kind of maybe disagree a little bit about blocking the proposed changes, at least for a timeline, because another thing that came up too is, and like I think we need to establish some boundaries around when the KEP templates can change.
Yeah,
like
no,
because
that's part of it. Yeah,
changing it in the middle of the changing it at certain times, like especially when the enhancements authors are working on it, is a source of frustration for enhancement authors that I think we can avoid.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we're really talking about in general is like a template versioning policy, you know, like, so it's like you can slap a version on it, but the question is really like, what does that represent? And part of those questions are going to be like, how often do we roll changes to the template?
And when are changes to the template allowed to merge?
Yeah, like, okay, so how often do we roll changes to the template? I think that there's a question of sort of what merits like a template change, you know, like you might have like a collection of small things, but is that enough to like churn the template for every author, you know, versus like a major thing that you might want to target at a specific release of changes. So I think we're talking about like, I'm just taking some notes here because I'm excited that other people are talking about this, because I was proposed this and talked about this like more than a year ago and people weren't very interested. So,
were they just not interested, or were they against it? I think those are
different. There was a lot of like churn. There was like the cadence KEP, there was the pandemic, and then there was this receipts process that was kind of outstanding. So it just didn't feel like the right time, I think, to pursue it. But now that I think we have like a more established enhancements collection process relatively, it seems like a good time to revisit this, and other people are feeling the pain. So I think that it's also a good time to revisit it.
Yeah, and like I'm first like being a bit selfish, and like I think that there's some parts of the enhancement process that are very manual and could have some automation, like have a little bit less of a manual process around. I'm just trying to think of ways to help address that.
Yeah.
But as the enhancements lead, like, I mean, we have like the PRR reviewers, and they do quite a lot of like review of the KEP. But the enhancements team also, like, we're not seeking to fully automate, you know, like all of their work. Like, they still are reading the KEPs to make sure that there are sufficient like answers to some of the questions. I mean, that also provides something of a filter on the quality that ends up going to like the PR reviewers. So it's like, okay. So it's more just like, okay, I got you. Sorry.
So I just wanted to
drink a lot of coffee.
I want to put +1 on like more automation, and in reality, like authoring a lot of KEPs, there are so many sources of frustration that one more sort of frustration doesn't really bother me as long as it's automated source of frustration. So I want to know that my KEP is up to date with the latest, like whatever required, like whatever template is required, just let me know. I will update my questions. I will like reformat it the way needed. I don't want to learn about it last minute. So as long as it's not last minute, and I don't need to learn a process about versioning my KEP with regards to template, then I will be golden. So if there will be a process of versioning, let's not put it as a burden of learning about versioning to KEP authors. Like, just let them know, like, this is what your PR, like what your KEP supposed to look like. If it's different, then like I will update it. I will fix it. But I don't want to learn about like, okay, I will change a version of my KEP to this previous version because it didn't have this question. So I don't want that. I want I mean, process may help
No, that
us to version template, but it shouldn't be a burden on CAP authors to learn about versioning and know about that anything except I'm not.
yeah.
My PR, like my CAP is not doesn't meeting this kind of questions and such. So yeah, that was.
No,
And
I
ideally,
think
that's
that
like,
that's infinitely, I think, reasonable, and I think that one thing to aim, like we're just like spitballing and throwing ideas out there. But one thing to aim, I think, is to whatever we decide on how to version it and whatever the threshold for releasing the new kept version is, I think you really want that solidified before the start of the release, because you need to, really let the enhancements team know. You need to make sure that any required automation is in place. And then you need to know that on that first day that the release opens, the enhancement lead who sends out, hey, the enhancements are now being collected, or whatever they send out, can also let people know.
Exactly.
Hey, the kept template has the kept template has changed. These are the changes. If you have any questions, let me know. But FYI, this is what's happening. And so I think like this all has to be done before the first day of the release, because you also don't want the enhancement team like scrambling to find out. Like they need to know. And then that would also preclude any changes during the release cycle for the authors. Like you definitely can't make changes to the template during the release. Like I'm just taking it as a mistake that it merged, but I think that we can do a better job at preventing that mistake, like in a general sense.
But yeah, I think it's important that any of the changes, like you said, get communicated in that call for enhancements mail that gets sent out the first week of the release.
Many caps are surviving many releases, so like if this communication may not necessarily help. Like like let's say I have a feature going from beta to GA, and I generally need to wait 2 releases before I go to GA. 2 releases is the minimum. So I would miss one notification for sure. Second notification, maybe I'm working on this right now, but I mean maybe like 3 releases later I GA the feature, and like CAP has definitely changed a lot. So CAP template. So I will. Those notifications not necessarily helpful for me, but some automation.
What would be helpful?
Just automated check, like
the PR check or something.
PR check. Like if I'm updating my CAP and I'm trying to merge a change of beta to GA, then something will fail. Tell me like I have new questions to answer. I have new sections to fill out. So this will be ideal.
No, that's really helpful. So we don't want to have just a PR check. We want to have a PR check, but we also want to have a widespread communication. We want to have the enhancements team know. They can't not know about the change. And we want to basically block those merges to the template.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not against
and
releasing needs to know for sure.
Yeah.
And being a little more thoughtful about how those changes are rolled out. Because like I think that Mark in his issue actually said like it'd be really helpful to have a diff, and it's really hard to have a diff of something like.
Yeah, I think I said a change log or something, so that because I thought about a couple things, because like the keps do have like the table of contents, but sometimes people add new like headings in there too, so it's not sufficient to make sure that the
kept would just be nice.
Yeah, just a diff would be nice.
Because that's like, I don't know how to do that, and I can find out. But I think that like if you're looking, like, because you're exactly right, like there are like the big things that change, but then there's the little things that change that you're never going to catch, like Sergey's change right there, where he like removes something that no longer exists, and that's not something that you would necessarily catch if you're just checking headers or something like that. So I think like the full diff would be nice. I just made that up, but...
would work. Yeah, I mean, there may be concerns that people changing questions, just a little bit of formatting of a question. I saw people just making them in a whole line or anything, but you will say to them like, your change will fail validation. We're looking for exact substring. Yes, it's frustrating, but like just deal with that. People will deal with that. Like I don't think it will be a problem. So as long as we have a rules clear, and this rules really help in a long game, like it really helping you to get your PR merged, then people will follow. I don't think it should be a problem to just search for substrings.
Yeah, I think if it's an automated check and it clearly says like your kep is missing this, please fix it, otherwise it won't merge, people will fix it to do that. But if it's up to like a human kind of nitpicking on it, I think that's going to cause a little bit more friction.
Okay. I think that I totally agree with you guys. So I'm excited that somebody cares about this right now. Okay, cool. I think I'm gonna try to make like a document of ideas for this, because I think that this involves more than just like, as we've just discussed, like slapping a version on something and calling it a day. And maybe I can put some ideas into a doc.
Created too to start a discussion or something.
Yeah, that's in the wrong repo. Oh no, it's not.
I tried to put it in SIG release, and then the SIG release people moved it to the enhancements repo.
Okay.
I didn't think it belonged in the enhancements repo because it's just getting lost with all of the actual enhancement issues.
Yeah, the enhancements subproject is owned by SIG architecture, so it's definitely not SIG release, just like as an FYI. So yeah, I actually had something open like before. I think I'm gonna take some notes on this because there's like a couple things. There's like the automation. There's, the way I see it is there's kind of some buckets. There's the automation. There's the what is a version, right? What is a new kep version, right? Like that's actually like a question, because it's like, is every little change a new kep version or not? Like, do we withhold like some small changes? Like when do we cut a new version of a kep? Like that's actually, I think, a pretty big question. And then there is like general, what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh yeah, we just want to, what is a new kep version? And then like, when is a version cut / blocking merges?
And do we want to like batch up the changes too?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like the third one, it's kind of like, maybe that's the case of a branch where, especially like if people doing PRR are making, you know, smaller changes, when we decide to cut a version, like there's a critical mass of changes that are there where it makes sense to have authors sort of make these changes. We can say, okay, like we're gonna make this the new main and this is now version whatever, right? Like that becomes now the new master. So we're not blocking people iterating on the template, but we're also not making authors feel like they have to change their kep in the moment, which I think is what happened in the case that you kind of highlighted, because I saw the PR author was like, oh, I didn't intend for that to happen. Like I didn't want people to actually update the thing, but basically people are iterating on the actual template, which I think is also like a problem. So yeah, so that's like 3 general buckets, I think. The automation is basically checks on open PRs so that they're using the recent template. And then what is a kep version, right? Like when do we cut a new version? How do we name it? Etc. And then like, I guess this one should go before that, right? Like, well, what is this new version? Yeah. And then when is a version cut, right? Because we're not going to cut a version for every tiny change to the kep template. Like there has to be an idea of like a critical mass of change, or of maybe a really important change that everybody agrees is important, but there has to be some sort of like standard for what a version is and where that kind of draft template lives. because we don't want to say like, oh, like, because then it just ends up being like this weird, like, what happens to the caps, right? Like everybody has their PRs open forever, and you can't really see what you have. So you kind of want those merged somewhere. It could be a different branch. It could be, like a staging directory or something. But then I think that would allow us to also do a diff, which would be nice. Directly, where do we store incremental changes, draft changes to template, branch, separate, dir, etc. This would allow a diff though. Dallas diff better. Because the thing is if we had automation and we had a diff, that would actually be pretty good too. Okay, so those are the 3 buckets. I think I'm going to, the one thing I think as like a triage step though, talk to PRR and others to hold off on merges to active template. I think that's like a triage step while the rest of it gets figured out. I kind of have less of a problem with Sergey's thing because it's like so self-contained, but that's kind of a separate issue that might be solved by some of the automation.
Yeah, the question for my PR is who gonna approve it? Right now, John Bilamaric has permissions to all these folders, so they can theoretically approve it, and he promised at some point to do that. And but then, like, if you do similar changes in future, do we keep John as a main contact for that?
I think no. I think like part of the problem is John wears different hats in a way because he's PRR, but then he's also an enhancement sub-project, but leans more in the PRR side. And I think that I would say just off the cuff, like this is totally off the cuff, that any changes to the template should be like brought to the enhancement sub-project meeting and the enhancements channel, just so that there's that second or third set of eyes who can think through the timing and all of the other kind of issues that we talked about today. Because I think that was part of the problem that Mark ran into, was that something was approved that probably needed a little bit more thought, like in the way of general enhancement, like the template thought.
The rollout
like,
of the communication and things like that.
Yeah, like should we roll this out now as opposed to like, is this a change that we like? But I'm going to template changes. But I think that if we can solve the third bucket of sort of like when is a version cut, and how do we store those changes, I think that it'll be a little bit easier to figure out like who's approving it and whether or not all of the eyeballs are actually on it, right? Because if we have like I don't know, I'm just making it up. If we just have like a staging branch and all those changes are going into the staging branch, and then at some point we feel like, well, there haven't been changes to the template in a while, but maybe this is a good time for the next release, roll out these changes. That's something that we can have like a lot of internal communication with enhancements, PRR, everybody else, let the release team know, make sure everything makes sense, and then merge that, approve it, merge it, and then communicate it along with all of the like automation checks. So I think these are all kind of tied together in a way.
Yeah.
But I think that like there's some of the technical automated steps that can happen. I think that all of this can kind of be done in tandem as well. So, but I think for a first step, I'm just going to figure out the best way to just like not make any more changes to the active template, because I think that we have to figure out some of the other questions before we make any further changes. Yeah. Okay, cool. So
what are kind of the next steps for figuring out, like, especially the automation or the figuring out like how to do the branches?
So maybe maybe I'll make a board like in the enhancements repo about this, and then try to break some of this down into cards. And some of it just might be like, let's figure out like what's actually possible for Markdown, you know,
Okay.
like, because I think that might be a little trickier than like a YAML. I mean, we can update the kept.yaml, and that could be like a pretty, like, once we decide what a version is, that could be a pretty clear thing of like, well, you need a kept.yaml to have the newest version. And that's going to be like a signal, might not be the most polished signal to the author with a diff and all of that, but that's going to be a signal that you're not using the right template version just right off the bat. And I think the Markdown might take a little bit more fussing to try to figure out like what's really possible with the Markdown. Let's say, so I'm going to say to do, make a board, create some cards, especially exploring what is possible for Markdown parsing. Because I think that's kind of gonna be a little bit limiting for what we can do, but we can do the YAML. So, okay. Does that sound okay? I'm kind of babbling, and I'm a little tired.
Yeah, it sounds okay.
Last night.
Yeah, and one test of this process will be this issues that we discussed. I think it was last week or 2 weeks back, that we need to clarify what integration test means versus end-to-end test.
Yeah.
So this will be change of template. It's
see,
likely just
I
comments.
Thought that was, yeah. See, I thought that was an interesting sub issue. Like when we say, like, what changes do we allow to the template? Like, do you want to withhold clarifying instructions, right? Like, because there's a difference between setting new requirements or changing requirements versus clarifying instructions, or, you know, fixing a Markdown error, or, you know, whatever that is.
Yeah, this mostly a comment that we'll add, and likely it wouldn't be blocking or breaking for anything.
Yeah. So, but let's make sure that for that change, we kind of roll it out together and we don't merge it without just making sure of what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm more open to merging like instruction clarifications than any sort of new requirement, because I think it's the new requirement that really gets people confused. And I think the instructions are also something that could assist the enhancements team in rolling out the enhancements for the release. Okay, so I'm just gonna.
And I was just checking, and it seems like the way that people have done something similar to add like metadata to Markdown files. There's a HTML meta tag that you can put in Markdown files that causes it to most like rendering engines will not render that, including like the GitHub UI, but you can still use HTML like document parsers to pull that out. So that might be a good way to, if we wanted to stick a version tag or like a version in the actual Markdown, is to use the meta like HTML tag.
Okay, so I'm going to tag you on the card that I make.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
So that's not it. Okay. So yes, I will do that over the long weekend. And we'll see. And I think that some of these things can probably get started, and then some things we can immediately kind of just talk to other teams about holding off on merges, and being aware that if you see a merge to the template, to hold it and, you know, bring it to the enhancements channel, or to the enhancements meeting, because I think that's where like the conversation would happen, where me or somebody else might be like, hey, this might not be a great idea to roll out right now. So that's kind of like a lo-fi solution to the issue as well. So, okay, cool. I actually have to go to another meeting. I'm probably gonna get in trouble.
Thank you.
But is that okay? I'll let you guys know when I get the board and everything else going. And then we can just feel free to make new cards or clarify the cards or write thoughts on them or something. Maybe break them up in different ways. But yeah, this has been really great. Thank you so much for your thought and bringing this to everyone's attention. This is awesome.
All right, sounds good. Thank you for taking all the notes.
No, I'm
Thank you.
excited.
Bye.
Well, I have like cards that were already open on this, so I'm pretty excited that other
Oh,
people
okay.
can.
Nice.
Okay, bye.
Yep.
Bye bye.
Bye.